Okay, in activity 22, we're going to study in A and B a second purpose of self-government. We saw the first one was keeping government from harming us, keeping government from killing us, stealing from us, etc. There is a second purpose, and this may be the one we're sort of more familiar with. Letter A is kind of a complicated quotation. I'm going to focus especially on the second part of it, where Adam says, "I'm fully persuaded that the people of the United States, being in different climates, of different education and manners, possessed of different habits and feelings, under one consolidated government cannot long remain free, or indeed under any kind of government but despotism." So he is saying that with a country as large as the United States, you really need not one government governing the whole, but you need maybe one government governing the whole in some areas, but in a lot of other areas you need 50 separate governments, or at that time 13, 14, 15, however many there were. I guess 13 in 1789. So say 13 states, you need 13 different governments, 13 different legislatures to reflect what the people of that state want. Because the people of New York are going to see things different from the state of Georgia. In our time, the state of Texas is very different from California, New York, Massachusetts, etc. So if you want the laws to reflect the wishes of the people, the values of the people of a particular area, you need local and state governments to reflect that. Now, that being the case, the second purpose of liberty is precisely that. If we're going to live under laws made by our representatives in a legislature that's close to us, and those laws are going to reflect the values and judgments of the people who are going to live under those laws. And so it's going to be different from state to state, or even sometimes from city to city. Maybe you'll have a dry city here, a wet city here, etc., as far as whether there's going to be alcohol or not. The point of Jefferson is the same in letter B. He's pointing out in letter B that the federal government does not have power over freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. So any laws concerning religion, speech, and press are going to be made by the state governments. And he says in the second part of letter B, thus was manifested their determination to reserve to themselves, the people's determination to reserve to themselves the right of judging how far, for example, the licentiousness of speech and of the press may be abridged. So he's talking about the personal liberties. Licentiousness is when you go out of the permitted area of choice and getting into areas that are harmful to society and to people. So he's saying, well, who should draw that line exactly where it should be? The people who live under those laws, state by state by state by state. So you can see here the second purpose of self-government as reflected in A and B is living under laws that reflect the moral judgments, the beliefs, convictions of the people who are represented by that legislature. One thing I want to point out in this little mini lecture in activity 22 is just maximum self-government is to be had through the government that's closest to you. City closest, then state, then federal. We have the least amount of self-government through our federal government. We have some, but much less than through our more local governments. This is partly just a matter of size. In a city, you're 1 out of 100,000, or one out of 1 million people. In a state, there's a few more than that, and then in a federal, you're 1 of 330 million people. So your voice counts for a lot less. Also, just think in terms of, what I said before, the people of Texas see things more eye to eye than, say, the people of Texas tossed in with the people of California and all the other states. So for the people of Texas to live under laws that reflect what Texans want, that's going to be made by the state legislature. Once you get to the federal legislature, then there has to be a negotiation with the people of all the other states, and then the final outcome is going to reflect a lot less what the people of Texas desire. So whenever decisions are made, go out from us, transferred from state to federal, etc., then self-government decreases. That's the point that will be brought out more later. Letter C and D begins the important points about self-government. I'm going to go back to our picture here and just remind us of what we saw before, that self-government protects us from governments. But I'm going to introduce another character into this drawing. What this ends up doing is, to be more precise, is the self-government makes sure that the government doesn't harm the majority of people. Because the government will do what the majority wants wherever there's self-government, and the majority doesn't want the government to harm them. But what if you now introduce the idea that in a democracy, in a republic where there is self-government, you introduce this figure of the evil side of we the people. What happens when we the people, meaning the majority, want to violate the rights of the minority in their life, liberty, or property? Then you have a problem, and you don't have liberty, because liberty requires that the life, liberty, and property of any individual is not violated. So you have this potential now where government will harm the minority because that's what the majority wants. And when I use the word minority, don't think only ethnic minorities or racial minorities. We're talking about numerical minorities, as we will see as we look more at this. But notice in letter C of this activity that Madison is emphasizing, wherever the real power in a government lies, there is the danger of oppression. Now, in our governments, the power is in the majority. So if you're concerned about the invasion of private rights, life, liberty, and property, it's going to happen, especially when the government is the instrument of the major number or majority of the people. When the majority decides, hey, we want government to violate the property, say, of the minority, take the property from them and give it to us, that's where the danger lies in a government where there's self-government. Now, letter D is focusing on the issue of slavery, where you can see Madison in letter D speaking out in the Constitutional Convention against the evil of slavery, and he puts it in terms of majority oppressing the minority. So Republican liberty is, the word Republican means a government where the people have input into the laws. And he's pointing out that in a number of the states, we've seen the mere distinction of color made a ground of the most oppressive dominion ever exercised by man over man. He's calling American slavery the most oppressive dominion ever in history exercised by man over man. You could not have a stronger condemnation of slavery by Madison in the convention. Then he goes on to say, what's been the source of these unjust laws? It's been the real or supposed interest of the major number. So because in the state of Virginia, for example, the majority wanted there to be slavery, there was slavery. And so you had the violation of the rights of the African slaves, especially their right of personal liberty. They were chained, they were confined, they couldn't leave. And so, especially violating the right of personal liberty, you see the majority violate